So, one of the things that I want to do, and one of the things I'm doing as a part of my commitment to elevate leadership, to shift how we think about leadership, is help introduce incredible leaders to you, whoever may be watching this video, make some of what's going on around the world in and around leadership more available. And I'm really excited to have a short conversation and introduce you to Harriet Hancock, who is a part of the faculty of the SCG Leadership Institute. In fact, she's not only part of the faculty, she was the very first faculty member. And probably a story for another day is that all came about the day after I met her for the very first time. And it's because she is just that incredible. And I think you're going to love her. I know you're going to love her. And so I'm excited to introduce her here in this video. So just a little context, a little background about Harriet is she is currently a senior leader in immigration and justice over in the United Kingdom. So a lot of people watching this, like me, are going to be here in the United States. So it's cool to bring perspectives from around the world, not just leadership in the US, but global leadership. And you are certainly that, Harriet. And before she was working in her current role, she spent nearly 2 decades in senior leadership in prisons. So the other thing that I want to do as a part of this program is introduce leaders and perspectives from some places you wouldn't expect. And everybody I've shared that you are a part of this, you are joining us, and you will be leading a masterclass coming from immigration, justice, and prisons, they automatically get curious. So thank you for saying yes and being involved. And thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today.
Thank you, Daryl. To that point, I feel really passionate about talking about leadership. I love talking about leadership. And in my head, the industry that I've spent all of my leadership years in, it's just the gym I've been to. It's the same muscle set. It's just the dojo where I did my working out. But there is something about the particular dojo I worked in that for me, I notice when I talk about it, it does deal with some excuses that we probably all use sometimes around what is and what isn't possible. So I'm really happy to share it, and I'm really happy to be invited to talk about leadership because it's for me it's been really interesting to explore and finally, after years of leading, to really identify with myself as a leader. And what is that? What is it to be a leader? I guess sometimes that's differentiated as a manager versus a leader. But for me to really identify as a leader and what is it I'm leading, and what is my vision and what is my direction, all of that has grown within me in the dojo of prisons, really.
Well, and I love that you went there to start because I think with the introduction I gave, our curiosity is piqued around what leadership in prisons even looks like. And I know a word that when I think about prisons automatically gets thrown around is in toughness. And you and I have had a few conversations about toughness and what is toughness in leadership. So what are your thoughts on that? What does it mean to be tough as a leader?
So that's a cool question. And that in the specific dojo where I work out, like toughness looks like dealing with those criminals in the most robust way possible. And there are leaders that do that. And that's not me. And I could never be that. And actually, for me, what feels like toughness is a relentless pursuit of leading with love, whatever is happening. And I know that's odd language in a prison context, and some people aren't always that comfortable with that language. You could call it optimism. You could call it positive leadership. For me, I'm really comfortable calling it love because to me that really is what it is. And by the way, with that love, I don't mean some kind of fluffy. Let's not hold residents accountable for their crimes. Let's not consider risk. I don't mean that at all. That would not be what I call love. For me, love in prisons, love in justice, love in immigration is love. Sometimes that's tough love, right? That includes taking account of risk. That includes taking account of past behavior. That includes considering victims. Includes all of that. And I say that because I think people sometimes get confused by my use of that language. But for me, that toughness if I'm relentlessly committed to coming from a place of love or optimism, then I'm relentlessly committed to creativity and possibility in a place where it really doesn't look like there is a lot of that. And so if you're a resident in a prison, that individual person might feel like their possibilities are limited. I don't know about the state of prisons across the world, and I'm not going to begin to make a comment about UK prisons, but they're busy places, they're complex organizations, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of incidents that have to be dealt with. That's a tough job. That looks like a tough job. But that approach from love and optimism all gets easier because of the creativity and the sense of possibility in that space. And it can look like there is no possibility sometimes in that kind of level of complexity. There have been days when I've been leading and we've had all kinds of incidents going off in the prison. And it's looked like there's only one way this day is going to end. And, let's hope the riot squad get here on time. But it's not about that. It's about focusing on where is the possibility, where is the hope, where are the options. And for me, that comes out of love. That comes out of looking at the problem of prison, the problem of the person, whether that's a member of staff or a resident, but looking at them from a perspective of love.
It's a beautiful way to think about who we're being as leaders. And it's one of the things that I like to talk about in the school, because there's a million leadership programs out there. You've probably been through a handful yourself. And one of the things when people ask me, well, what is it about the Institute? What is it about the people you're bringing in, the conversations you're going to have, the cohort that's coming together? What is it that sets you guys apart? And I often talk about coming from this place of being. And it starts not with what are we doing? This isn't just about a framework or a strategy or the doing part of it, but it starts with how we are showing up on a day-to-day basis as leaders. And it sounds like that is something that really is driving how you show up. And from the outside looking in, right? I've never spent time in prisons or around immigration or some of these other places, but my mind immediately goes to, gosh, I imagine that's a tough place to come from a place of love, to come from a place of positivity or optimism. But it sounds like that is a foundation of where your leadership starts.
It is. And to me, language creates. If we think an industry, an organization, a company, whatever, if we think it's tough, it'll be tough. And I don't know, I don't think I would have survived nearly 20 years in the prison service if I thought it was tough, because in fact, let's backtrack. I take that back. I think I spent quite a lot of time, because I remember when that shifted, actually. I really remember when that shifted. That's an important story. May I share it? So at the time, I was in a role where I was working with a group of 5 prisons, and my role was to bring about improvements in those 5 prisons with a view to reducing suicide, self-harm and violence. And in at least 2 of these prisons, that was a real challenge. There was a lot going on, and that was quite a change to make. And that was my job. It was my job title. It was my remit. Like, everything about my job was to reduce suicide, self-harm and violence. And yet it wasn't reducing. And I took that really, really personally. And I poured my heart and soul into solving the problems to some effect. But the problem couldn't be solved from me when I was coming at this from a perspective of, I've got to get this right, and it's all up to me. And so my leadership was diminished, like it was coming from a good place in terms of I had absolutely the right commitment, compassion, values around it. But it was coming from a kind of scarcity where I was approaching this from, I've got to get it right and it's all up to me. And so every time someone hurt themselves or another person, that was, me whacking myself over the head with, you didn't get it right. You got to fix it. You got to fix it. And, worse, when we had self-inflicted deaths, which were completely heartbreaking, I really felt that, like, I've got to fix this. This is lives. This is people's lives that matter. And I really remember a conversation with a 3 principles coach who just asked a very gentle question. He said, it sounds like you think this is all up to you. And like, that's such an innocent, soft, sweet little question, but it changed everything, because obviously my answer was, you're damn right it's up to me. I'm in charge of reducing suicide, self-harm and violence in 5 prisons. Yeah, it is up to me. It's my job. But then I was like, well, hang on a minute. There's hundreds of staff in each of these prisons. There's one little me, 5 prisons. Like that actually can't be right. I can't believe anyone is expecting me to do this on my own. And so this began to unravel into something different, where I started to create a space of possibility. This is where the magic dropped in, because I started to think, well, it's not necessarily all up to me, and maybe there is no getting it right, because this has been a problem long before I was around. It's probably going to be a problem after I've left. But I started to loosen up. And in that space of looseness, it occurred to me, and I can share this story maybe in the masterclass, maybe another time. But it was in that context that it occurred to me that maybe I could just love the problem. Maybe I could look at the problem with a loving gaze and see what came out of that. And what came out of that was a loosening within myself, like creativity came from within me, better connections between me and my team and the prisons and the residents. Better ideas started to flow. And we slowly started to make quite a big impact in the data on this. But it wasn't because I suddenly came up with the big strategy. It was because inside I shifted to a place of love. And some of it was love for myself, of shifting away from, I got to do this. This is proper grown up work. This is important. It's got to be done and I've got to do it, which is like really squashy thinking. Like when I could shift out from under that, I could see, well, what bubbled up, I didn't even have to create it. What bubbled up was love. And I could see the extraordinary impact of love, loving the problem, loving the people, loving myself, loving the situation.
The smile you see on my face is just knowing that people involved in the school, people that enroll in the school are going to get access to this conversation. They're going to get to continue learning. And what you just modeled is something that I would invite anybody listening to this to go back and listen to again what you shared. But instead of listening to it as a story about Harriet, listen to it as a story about themselves. I was going to ask you a question about what can the rest of us learn from what you're seeing about leadership in prisons. You've just shared it. There's so much about the way we approach, the way we show up, that finding that looseness, finding those feelings. And it's so natural that we're always looking to the next strategy or the next framework or the next tactic, right? Or the next outsourced contractor to come help us do something. And you're suggesting that sometimes it's nowhere out there to be found, that there's something within us, that if we start to shift something within us and how we're showing up as leaders, then the rest of it starts to fall into place. We have access to more creativity. We have access to more fun. We have access to more collaboration. We have access to more connection. And lessons like that you're bringing to the table are just beautiful to see. And I invite everybody watching this video right now to really think about that, because I imagine that some of the same words that one might use to describe a prison or the culture of prisons in the UK are some of the very same things we talk about the organizations we find ourselves in, regardless of the industry. Busy, messy, all over the place, and they're not judgments, they're just thoughts we have about a circumstance, right? Or this problem's been here forever and it's all on me to fix, to solve, to correct. And there's more to see. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, I'm going to do something that has just occurred to me. And I'm going to ask you one final question, because my goal is to keep these fairly short. And it's just to expand on this. It's, you're going to be spending a couple hours with the people in the school, people that are going through this 6-month program. And you're going to share some of what is yours to share. And there's going to be space for them to ask questions. So if somebody was to say, well, Harriet, what could your experiences through prisons, through working through immigration and some of the other places you found yourself in your career, what could I expect to get or learn or see by spending this time with somebody who is in such a different industry and has such different experiences than what I may find in a corporate job or a marketing organization or a healthcare organization or whatever it might be? What is some of the crossover you see that is going to be available as we all spend time together? That's
a good question. I think if you are working in a company that has people in it, people of any description, then there's crossover. So I've worked in essentially a people industry. There's a bunch of staff, so there's a bunch of people there that I've worked with and cared for and led and thought about and developed and strategized around and with. And then there's a bunch of people that we're providing a service to. So and then there's a government that we're providing this service to these people to benefit a government policy or to further a government policy. So I can't imagine that anyone's working in an industry that doesn't have people in it. But the other thing is, and this is why I think of my prison just being the dojo where I happen to have led, is that it's just like any other dojo, any other gym, but it's got its own vibe. And I think in the particular kind of vibe that I've done all my workouts in, all my leadership workouts in, I do think there's something really special there. I do think there's something extraordinary. And I know from talking to teachers, people that work in education, people that work in policing, people work in medicine, people that work in those kind of fields where a big part of the goal is to bring a person on. Like the service is to take someone from one place to another, take a person from committing a crime to being rehabilitated and resettled back into the community. I think that is a pretty magical space because it's a bit like parenting. You can't give up on the person. And so when for me, my experience of working in prisons, there's something very special about that dynamic. I can never give up on the problem. If the problem's the person, and I wouldn't really describe any person as a problem, but if people can cope with that language, if the problem is the person, I can never give up on that problem. Like I'm committed to that. And I guess that speaks back to that toughness point. But there is something special about working with problems you're never going to give up on. That for me creates a special alchemy that in terms of leadership and in terms of presence in that space that is really, really special. I have got way more working in prison than any prisoner got out of me. And I gave my heart and soul to them. But what I got back from those experiences was 1,000 times more powerful.
And it's one of the reasons I remember the walk you and I took and when I was in the UK and you were sharing some of the stories, some of the leadership lessons that you actually learned from prisoners, from spending time with them, the things that have impacted you and your leadership. And it's one of the things I'm so excited about bringing into the Leadership Institute is that because you're here, we all get access to those lessons. We get access to the things you've seen and you've learned that have impacted your journey and now can impact ours. So again, I know I've said it to you over and over again, and I will continue doing so. Thank you for being a part of this. This is going to be a treat, and this is going to be available to anybody. There's so much in what you shared just in our short time together today, and I'm so excited for what's going to be available later in the program. So thank you so much, Harriet, for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Daryl, and excited for the leadership school. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to let it record and we'll just cut it out. But I want to quickly ask, I'm going to ask you one more question and maybe we use it. And maybe it's just a separate video altogether because I want to seize the moment of the thing that is fresh for you, right? And maybe this becomes some video that we never use publicly and it's just yours to use in some way that is useful. But my wisdom's telling me just capture this because we're here. So I'm going to ask you one more question and maybe we So, Harriet, I know before the recording started, you were telling me about some of the new experiences you've been having in the new year. And you've been telling me about this shift in your relationship with health and some of the new things you've taken on. And as you were telling me one of the stories, you said something about leadership that you've learned from the story. And you said, I can't afford to have gaps. I can't afford to have gaps. I was wondering if you could just spend a couple minutes speaking to that and what you saw in that, because that really struck me when you shared it.
Oh, good question. So that came out of becoming aware. I didn't think this consciously, but I think I thought something like, it's okay, I can excel as a leader and I can do brilliant things in that aspect of my life. And it's okay that I'm not really taking care of my health. Like, that's just like a thing over here that I can keep in the dark someplace. And one day I'll deal with that. And I started to become aware that actually, if I really want to excel as a leader, I can't have those gaps. And I can't have, there's a level at which that sits, which is, if I want to expend lots of energy as a leader, then I've got to have lots of energy. So it makes sense to take care of my physical health. That isn't what I'm talking about. That is true, and that is not what I'm talking about. The gap for me was, if I really want to be deliberate about being an exceptional leader, then I can't have areas that aren't exceptional. And I'm not saying that from an arrogant perspective of, I'm really amazing, every aspect of my life is really amazing. I'm not saying that. But I can't have areas where I'm not even bothering or willing to look at. Like for me, and so what I've seen is, so I'm on a very new health and fitness journey, but I've seen already, I can see that in my leadership. So a very, do you want me to talk about my calendar bit? Because
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's connected.
Tiny practical shift was tiny but massive. That tiny degree change in the course of a journey can, over miles, turn into something enormous. So one of my excuses for not being able to address, take on fitness was I don't have time and I travel a lot for work and I don't know what days I'm where. And I was talking to a brilliant coach about this who just asked a very innocent question. And the question was, I thought you were the boss. And I was suddenly like, oh, yeah, I am actually in control of my calendar. And I can take control of this. So I decided, okay, right, well, I'll just make some adjustments to my calendar and I'll say I can travel on these days and not on these. And then I can create some space where I can commit to some kind of physical health program. And so that's done. And then I saw from that dropping of thinking about calendar and, I've been complaining for 6 months about I don't know where I am on any given day, but actually that was sorted in an instant, and I just adjusted my calendar. And then I plug in these days I'm going to go to the gym, and it turns out that was really easy too, because again I had all of this self-talk around, well, I don't have time, I'm really busy, I've got a family, I've got a really important job, I don't know how to create time. And then it just came to me, well, most mornings I spend at least 40 minutes arguing with myself to get up and get out of bed and get on. And half of that time is spent thinking I should be exercising. And the other half is I really want to sleep more. Well, why don't I just get up? So I'm now going to the gym at like 6 a.m, leaving home at 5:30 to get there. And it's easy. It's just fit in and it's easy. And it's not like I'm even compromising sleep, because I was awake anyway, just complaining to myself about being awake. But so that's a funny little story and it's lighthearted. Oh, she fixed her calendar, she's starting going to a gym, fine, easy. But it's what I see then happening in my leadership from that, and this is really fresh, is I can see a level of commitment. I can feel it in myself and in my presence, and I can see my presence in my team in a really different way, in a really palpable way. And again, you could point to the practical. I'm responsible for the well-being of a team of over 1,000. Well, that's not going to happen if I'm not responsible for my own well-being. Like, how well am I really looking after them if I'm not looking after myself? But also I can see it, I just see it in conversations where, because I'm starting to become a whole being rather than like 3/4 of a being, but I've just got these couple of bits that we're not bringing to work and I'm not, I'm just ignoring, and they can quietly, like gather dust in the corner. But when I'm showing up with my wholeness, the power that comes out of that is extraordinary. So it's this glorious byproduct of leadership just from fixing my calendar and going to the gym.
I love that story. It's a great story. I wanted to capture it so that we could share it, because I think we all have those places, those places that look a little different from how we show up to most places in our lives. And what you're pointing to is what's available to us when we start cleaning that up, when we create a higher level of congruence. And it's you know me well enough to know I'm passionate about coaching the whole person, working with the whole person, right? This isn't just about how we show up at work. One of the promises of the school is this will not only shift who you're being as a leader at work or in your organizations, but in the relationships that are important to you, and who you're being as a parent, and who you're being in your own home, and who you're being in the relationship with yourself. So it's a beautiful story that points to, no matter what we're talking about, it affects the results we create in our organizations, and what we're learning on this journey of leadership will affect all the other aspects of our life. So thank you so much for sharing it. It's a beautiful story.
Thank you.
I'm so glad we did that. That was brilliant.
That's good. What are you going to do with it?
I don't know. Maybe it gets worked into the interview we did earlier. Maybe it becomes a whole separate little clip. Who knows?
Yeah.
We talked about, you and I know the toughness question. We talked about recording a whole conversation around toughness. I mean, that could be a standalone clip. That's brilliant. I'm really glad I listened to myself. And I didn't ignore the, oh, look at the time and, maybe later.